Hi, the Zicklin peoples. You're listening to Your Morning Jacket. Your Morning Joe. Obviously. You're listening to the Your Morning Coffee podcast with Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart, weekly music news for the new music business. Take it away, guys.
From music business worldwide, Andreessen Horowitz's thoughts on AI shows what the music industry will be up against in 2024.
From Forbes, TikTok global head of music, Ula Oberman, on all things music.
And from Billboard, Spotify's 138% gain leads Billboard Global Music's indexes, 31% improvement in 2023. Those are some big numbers, Jay.
Yeah.
Big numbers.
Very much.
Very excited to be doing our show today. We're glad you're here. So we're going to start the show right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand! Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air. On the air. On the air. On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Well, Jay, greetings from the COVID ward here in Southern California.
I'm so sorry. And it looks like you look like you feel great.
I look great, don't I?
Really do.
I'm certainly on the end of it. Sharp listeners may recall last week's episode where at the end I said I was a little under the weather, and right after the show I was going to be testing. Lo and behold, I tested positive, and I continue to test positive, including up to this morning. So, but I'm feeling okay. And
Good.
Word to the wise, Jay, do not go to a 50th birthday party disco-themed event where there's lots of people dancing in a small room.
Mental note. Thank you.
I'm just saying.
I'm glad you're on the mend, though.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Got a lot to talk about. Very fun stuff. And then you're back in town. You had a good trip out of town.
Yeah, I'm not a good vacationer. I'm not. And I really didn't want to go. I love what I do, and I can't wait to get to my desk every day. And, you and I have such a blast doing this stuff. But I did go, and I did have a good time. And while I was gone, I still put together the newsletter, of course, but I was interacting with our friends over at Luminate, and listeners of this program know that it's one of our favorite reports. It's twice a year, kind of their mid-year report, but of course we're coming up on the annual Luminate, that year-end music report, and they're doing a presentation coming up this week. That's Jamie Markinette, who we've had on the podcast with Haley Jones, who's our head of independence. And I'm really excited about that, but I'm also excited that Jamie's agreed to come back on the program with us and walk us through that report. Any surprises, what trends he's seeing. And that was a lot of fun last year.
Yes, it was. It's really fun to hear it from the horse's mouth. And, again, I have such admiration and just a little bit of understanding how hard it is to put together and crunch these numbers. It's a lot of data to pull. It's a really Herculean effort, and they do a wonderful job. And it's such a wonderful snapshot. It's just really always so interesting.
Yeah, and it's year-end report season, and you and I get really giddy this time of year because we have, RIAA, which is U.S. We have IFPI, which is global. We have this Luminate report. It's really exciting to get these reports because there's always something new to learn. And we're going to read these reports so you don't have to.
That's right. That's right. It'll be really fun to to check in and hear as we look back now at 2023. What were the highlights? What were the lowlights? What were the things that you should be worried about? What what things should we be celebrating? And it's always fun. Always fun.
Yeah, so that presentation is coming up this Wednesday. That's for North America, and then they have another one on the following day for Japan, Korea, Central Europe, that sort of thing. So by the end of the week, we should have a pretty good sense of when Jamie can join us and what's going on with the reports. The other thing you and I were talking about before we hit record was there's been so much news lately about quote unquote virtual artists. And what that means is basically, real artists, human artists who have virtual sort of avatars or counterparts. And I know there's been a lot of news about ABBA. And even this last week, there was a piece in Music Business Worldwide that it was on the economic impact of that ABBA voyage, which is that virtual concert basically, and they've generated over $400 million in the first year, and that led you and I to talk about some of these other ones.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting. As you were talking about this, I'm trying to think back. What year was it that, remember there was kind of a handful of things that kind of happened. One was Roy Orbison. There was something here in LA with Roy, with a Roy Orbison sort of virtual concert. So, and there were these kind of tests, but now, man, it's hopping. It's the ABBA thing has been going on for a bit now, and obviously to rave reviews, $400 million plus an economic impact in London is nothing to sneeze at.
No.
And then you mentioned the Rolling Stone article. It said there's an Elvis Presley hologram to perform on a London stage later this year.
Yeah.
Like AI, like everything, it's, it kind of starts and it seems like a relatively short amount of time that it is running full steam.
Yeah. We thought it was, Star Trek. We thought it was the future, when we talked about AI 5 years ago at the Music Tectonics Conference, and it's upon us, as you say. And, that ABBA thing launched in July of 2022. So it hasn't been around that long, right? No. And then that 400 million, as you mentioned, is all 2023, this last year, now that we're into 2024. And of course, in the news lately, there's been a lot of talk of, Kiss and their End of the Road tour, and that they're saying farewell to live touring, and that they're really the first U.S. band to go virtual, and they've become digital avatars. And I believe that's going to launch in 2027. So I would imagine we're going to see more of this if it has the same sort of success that ABBA has had over in the UK.
Yeah, and I was thinking, can you think what's another band you can think of that would be a good candidate for
Beatles?
This? Yeah,
I think the Beatles might be kind of cool. Michael Jackson.
They would, of course, have to prove that Michael Jackson for sure.
Maybe Jimi Hendrix.
Tupac, maybe.
Tupac. Yeah.
So again, lots of. And there has to be, much like AI. I believe there has to be some considerable source material with which they can pull from and sculpt, so to speak. So that kind of depends, but. And probably like you, I kind of look at these and go, man, I'm not sure what I think about it, to be honest. One side of me is really interested, curious, and the other side is like, oh, I don't want to like it, But I've heard from a handful of people that have seen it, the ABBA one at least, that it's like freaking great.
I think I have to go see it because for me, it's not the same experience when you go to a live show and the lights go out and you see your favorite artist there and the electricity. I don't know if it's going to be that sort of experience, but it could be an interesting experience, like maybe going to see the Taylor Swift movie or something. I don't know.
Just thinking the same thing. Yes.
Yeah. So
will there be dancing in the aisles? I don't know. Yeah. And I'm not passionate about ABBA. So that's another, and of course ABBA had a much bigger following outside of the US than inside of the US.
Yeah.
Big in the US as well, but not nearly as big.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We will continue to check in on these things. And we do need to get over there and see the Abbott show. So
that would be great. The other thing that you and I were sort of talking about is, and we're going to cover it as our third story today, there was a fantastic version of the Ledger newsletter by Glenn Peoples at Billboard. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But some real positive news there. But we should, before we jump into the stories, we should sort of thank our sponsors, the people who brought us to the party.
So to speak, indeed. How about Bandzoogle? Our podcast. I can't talk, Jay. Our podcast. I've got COVID on the mouth, I think. Our podcast is brought to you by our friends at Bandzoogle. For over 20 years, Bandzoogle has made it easy to build a stunning website and online store for your music. Now they've added a brand new EPK plan so that musicians can create a professional single-page electronic press kit in minutes. All the features you need to design an EPK are already built in, including fully customizable templates, preset EPK page layouts, music players, images, text bio, and video embeds, a gig calendar and press quotes, and access to Bandzoogle's award-winning support team 7 days a week. The new EPK plan starts at just $6.95 a month, and Your Morning Coffee podcast listeners can jump over to bandzoogle.com to try it free for 30 days. Then use the promo code MorningCoffeeEPK, all one word, to get 10% off the first year of the new EPK plan subscription. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code MorningCoffeeEPK when you sign up to the EPK plan.
Yes, sir. And we're also brought to you by Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. It's edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Alana Bonilla. Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town.
You betcha. Bands in Town. Over 80 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist service platform connecting over 590,000 artists with their superfans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms.
That's right. I use Bands in Town a lot. We're also brought to you by the Music Business Association. The Music Biz Conference creates the rooms in which the important conversations that shape the future of our industry take place, representing more than 90% of the music industry at large. The association serves as the connective tissue for the global music business and provides a trusted forum where ideas and collaboration can flourish. So join us for the Music Biz 2024 conference, May 13th through the 16th in Nashville.
Indeed. Big thanks to Bandzoogle, Hypebot, Bands in Town, and the Music Business Association. We certainly appreciate it. And man, for almost 200 episodes now, I've been getting to hang out with my good friend Jay Gilbert. He's a music industry consultant. He is the curator of the weekly Your Morning Coffee newsletter and a former executive with Universal Music, Sony Music, and Warner Music Groups.
Oh, well, thank you, brother. And this gentleman sitting across from me that I can't wait to chat with every week is it's Mike Etchart, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music, Capitol EMI, and Universal Music Group.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. So, Jay, let's kind of start talking about some of our stories. And as we jump into 2024, man, it seems weird to be saying that.
I know. It really does. It takes me a while to write down the correct year. Our first story is from Music Business Worldwide. It was written by Daniel Tenser, and the headline is Andreessen Horowitz's thoughts on AI shows that the music industry, what the music industry will be up against in 2024.
Yeah, a lot of issues that are going to be on the table this year as we start talking about the things, and specifically, really, we're talking about how AI needs to get trained, because that is such an important part of the process. And that's really what this article is going to kind of talk about. It says if the music industry gets its way on the issue of copyright and AI, it could cause the U.S. to lose its dominance in artificial intelligence to China, posing a national security threat while holding back innovation that could improve everyone's quality of life. Wow, that is a bold statement.
It really is. And for those that don't know, I mean, Andreessen Horowitz, Yeah, they're a venture capital company, and they're a major investor in music technology. But they have really great. Check out their website sometime, and really, really great reports. And I thought this article was really interesting because we get to see sort of behind the curtain a little bit. They mentioned that the wholesale appropriation of UMG's enormous catalog of copyright-protected sound recordings and musical compositions to build multi-billion-dollar commercial enterprises is anything but fair use. And that's written from UMG. We can think of no precedent for finding this kind of wholesale commercial taking that competes directly with the copyrighted works appropriated for fair use. And what they're talking about there is when people use this intellectual property, you hear people say IP, and they use it to basically train a model or use it to ingest into AI to create new works, whether that's music or lyrics or a combination of the two. And I think that they're drawing a line in the sand now saying, wait a second, you're not going to use our IP and not only to profit from, but even if you're not profiting from it, you don't have the rights unless you get a license to do that.
Right. Now, Andreessen Horowitz's take is a completely different view, arguing that training AI on copyrighted materials is actually indeed fair use and doesn't amount to theft of intellectual property. It implicitly rejects the argument that AI competes directly with copyrighted works. They say the overwhelming majority of the time, the output of a generative AI service is not substantially similar in the copyright sense to any particular copyrighted work that was used to train the model. So this was what they said in a submission that was filed back on October 30th, which there's a link actually in the article. You can read the full thing. But so that's an interesting, complete 180 take.
Right. And it reminds me of a conversation you and I had recently. We were talking about two industry attorneys, and both of them highly respected, very knowledgeable, and they had complete different views on can you use, AI to draw from somebody's body of work. And one of them was saying that if you used AI, that's not copyrightable by law. And the other was saying, well, if you're using someone's IP, then it really is. So it makes this all a bit gray.
Yeah, that is an understatement, Jay. It is very, very gray. So there's some interesting, noteworthy observations from their submission, and one of which suggests that there may be no practical way to train large language models (LLMs) that are the basis of many AI products without ingesting copyrighted material. And if those materials have to be licensed, it would give what it sees as an unfair advantage to large corporations at the expense of more agile startups, they say.
Yeah. Oh, man. This is where it gets a little nutty. They say the only practical way generative AI models can exist is if they can be trained on almost unimaginably massive amount of content, much of which, because of the ease in which copyright protection can be obtained, will be subjected to copyright, the submission states. It continues that imposing the cost of actual or potential copyright liability on the creators of AI models will either kill or significantly hamper their development. I don't know, Mike. I see this a little bit differently than Andreessen Horowitz does, and I'm not claiming to be at their level. It just, as a former musician and someone who works with a lot of musicians and artists, managers, labels, distributors, this doesn't feel right to me that someone could take my work and use it as part of their training their model to create something else. I don't know about that.
Well, one of the reasons they say limiting AI's development could cause the U.S. to lose its technological edge to China. So again, referencing this submission, it also makes an argument that falls far outside of the scope of what the music industry considers when looking at AI, that hobbling the technology's development through copyright law could prove to be a national security risk for the United States that says AI is not just being developed here in the U.S., for example, it's also being developed in China, which views AI not as a tool for the betterment of humanity, but as a weapon for greater authoritarian control and influence. As China aggressively integrates AI into its military strategies, surveillance apparatus, and economic planning, ensuring U.S. leadership in AI is increasingly about safeguarding our national security. We cannot afford to be outpaced in areas like cybersecurity, intelligence operations, and modern warfare, all of which are being transformed by this frontier technology.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So if we don't allow people to use AI to, basically ingest somebody's intellectual property, let's say it's, the Beatles catalog, that's going to affect our national security. They go on to say that there's a very real risk that overzealous enforcement of copyright when it comes to AI training, the ad hoc limitation of the fair use doctrine that properly protects AI training, that could cost the United States the battle for global AI dominance. I don't know, Mike. I'm not sure I buy that.
I don't necessarily either, but it is interesting to see, because don't forget, it's not just the music industry that's thinking about this. It's the entire tech industry, and so I can perhaps understand a little bit of this when you're talking other things, but when you're talking entertainment and music and art and film, it seems like there's a pretty vast divide between that and things that relate to national security to me.
Well, you make a very good point that this isn't just music, and I'm sort of myopic in thinking about music. They go on to say in the article that Andreessen Horowitz's temperament is clearly closer to that of the tech industry than that of the traditional music industry. The NMPA's submission to the Copyright Office describes AI as potentially, quote, the greatest risk to the human creative class that has ever existed, end quote. Despite the possibility of great benefits from generative AI systems that can assist human creators.
Yeah. Well, yeah, boy, it's when you kind of really open up, I want to be open-minded, I think, when I hear them make these comments and statements, but I still don't know if it's a long stretch to get where they're talking about. One of the interesting things they say is we believe that there is no material problem, whether created by nature or by technology, that cannot be solved with more technology.
Okay.
And that was, of course, Mark Andreessen, who in his book, The Techno-Optimist Manifesto.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not sure I kind of go along with that as well. So there's a lot of stuff here, Jay, that it's so hard to look. It's pretty easy to look into the future, say 6 months. But when you look down the road, so let's say a year or 18 months or 2 years or 2.5 years, things really start to get pretty fuzzy. And it's really hard to kind of, for me anyway, especially to look at articles like this and really project out and see, is this kind of true? Is this something to consider? Is this kind of hyperbole? And I'm not really sure. I don't want to dismiss it out of hand, but by the same token, it doesn't feel like it feels like some of this. And I think back again to our days at Universal Music, where we, the early days of the internet and people coming in and wanting to build businesses, build services on the backs of copyrighted material, and they wanted to control most of the profit of said ventures.
Right.
And, and of course we would have to raise our hand and say, you need us, basically. Yeah. And I think this is a bigger, broader, but a similar sort of landscape of that concept, which is, copyright is impeding it. Well, I can see that it would impede it or can, but again, is it going to impede our national security if we don't let them have free reign of copyrighted material? I don't think so.
I need to learn more about it, but I would just sort of put an exclamation point on this article that, my thinking is really a very protective view of the music industry and specifically songwriters. And I don't necessarily agree with some of this, but maybe I'm not looking at the larger picture involving, tech. So we'll certainly follow this really closely, and we'll also speak with, some of our smart music industry attorney friends and maybe have them pop on the show and give us a little bit of the legal side of some of this, because it seems like there's smart people on both sides that, maybe don't agree. But the bottom line is this stuff's been around about a week and a half, so don't feel stupid if you don't understand this stuff. It's evolving and changing very quickly. And as I've mentioned before, a great quote from my grandfather is, an idiot is someone who doesn't know what you just found out. So Let's leave it at that, and we'll be watching this very closely.
Right. That was by Daniel Tenser, by the way, that Music Business Worldwide article. Really interesting. And boy, you talk about thought-provoking. Yes, it was all of those things.
Yes.
So definitely worth checking out. Our next story from Forbes, TikTok Global Head of Music, Ula Oberman, on all things music, Jay.
Yeah, this was a really cool piece. And, I know Ula and I've spoken to him, and eventually I want to get him on the podcast to have some conversations with us. But this is an interview he did with Steve Balton, who is a writer or a contributor over at Forbes, and it was so beautifully done. And he kicks it off by saying, whether you're a data person or someone who relies more on anecdotal evidence, it's clear that TikTok is huge. Maybe the largest force at present in driving music this last year. The app is seen by 1 billion plus users who rely on it for music discovery, new and old, whether it's Tate McRae, who you and I were talking about recently, or young fans discovering Fleetwood Mac, Dreams. TikTok is a powerful instrument for music. Again, an understatement.
Understatement, as Steve said, goes on to say, so the question for me and most music fans is, how will TikTok use that influence to help musicians? Who is better to answer that question than the company's global head of music business and your friend Jay, Ula Oberman?
That's right. So we're going to go through, we're not going to read the entire interview, but we'll give you some highlights of it. Steve Balton kicks it off by asking Ula, do you check out a lot of new artists? That's one of the things I wanted to discuss, because I think one of the most important things is having, the human element.
Yes, and he says, so my background is I worked at record labels for 20 plus years and a couple of digital music companies before I came here a little over 4 years ago. So I'm a music-obsessed person. That's always been my personal interest, and luckily I've been able to make it my professional interest as well. He says, I feel really lucky that I can do that, and I come at it from a business side in terms of what my job is, but I come at it from a human side as well in terms of just loving music and getting a massive rush out of finding a new song or a new artist or believing in a song or an artist and having the ability to help hopefully introduce that music to lots of people at TikTok, or back when I worked at labels, through the labels. So that's how he comes at it, he says, which is great. And both you and I know about his background.
That's right.
And it's good to have a music guy in that role, for sure.
That's something that I think most people miss, is that he's not just this TikTok guy, who popped in, with an expertise in, social media or short form video. He's been around decades, and we've worked with him before, and he is definitely a passionate music guy. And I feel much better that, the guy driving, the music ship over at TikTok is that music guy. The second thing that he asked him was, at a label, of course, you're tied to specific artists, whereas at TikTok, you can basically promote any artist you believe in.
Yeah, and he says, so we might find something that we love as the people who work at TikTok and music and feature it on a playlist or an editorial. We might reach out to that artist or that manager and say, hey, just tell us a little bit more about the music. He says, and maybe we can then put our heads together to figure out a cool way to create a video that's going to spark some additional interest or awareness of the song. He says, but ultimately it is entirely up to the many people who are on TikTok, who are making videos, who are watching videos. So you're right, we can act on our own reaction, like how a song or an artist touches us, but most of what happens, it's up to the 1 billion plus people who are on TikTok and how they react to a song.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's the part that we sort of know, is that, yes, TikTok can get behind things and they can use their algorithm to put things that are blowing up or starting a fire in front of the right people. But there is some human interaction and involvement there. He asked, are you surprised by some of the times that the ones, by ones that do take off? And I thought this was super interesting.
Me too. And he said there are a lot of different ways to go with this. He said, so a good way to think about TikTok and the power of discovery of music on TikTok is this. In the past, radio played such a huge role in breaking new songs or artists because radio had a relatively large audience reach, but they always kind of broke it down to lowest common denominator, 10 songs or so that have requested well that will appeal to everyone in that large audience base. He says TikTok, in a way, does the same thing, but in a way completely flips that on its head because it's obviously a much larger audience. You're talking 1 billion plus people, and every single person gets a different feed that is completely personalized.
And that's the point right there, right? That's the point, is that it's completely personalized. And all those years that you and I grew up listening to radio, under our blankets so our parents didn't hear or know that we were doing it, it felt like it was personalized for us, but it was really more for the broader audiences. Balton asked, have there been one or two moments or one or two artists that have really started to emerge in there that you've been completely surprised by?
Yeah, he says they're all different and they're all super interesting. The first one is a big pop artist. He says, I think the next sensational pop artist is Tate McRae. From the beginning, she's very TikTok native. The guy who runs RCA, John Fleckenstein, who I used to work closely with at Sony, he told me early on, he said, she is the most native TikTok artist we've worked with at RCA. Everything she does, she's thinking, how is my TikTok fan base going to react to this? Or what can I do on TikTok? She did that from the very beginning. So we're watching that song blow up on TikTok over the last month or so. And that's, as I was reading that, I was thinking, it's like, yeah, so we are now hitting this generation of artists for whom literally grew up on TikTok.
Yeah.
And just have an innate feeling and closeness with the platform because that was just, it's always been there for them since they've been interested in music.
That's right. And that's what he's calling being native. And what I thought was great is he followed up that question. He said to Ula, you mentioned Tate McRae being a TikTok native. What makes someone good on TikTok?
He says, one thing I've learned since I've been here is a big part of it is just sitting down with the artist directly, or maybe it's the label and the marketing teams at the label, and they're still learning how TikTok works. They get the basics, but in terms of really understanding how to make a video that's going to market and promote your music in the best way possible, how to use the various sorts of features and functionality and creation tools that exist in TikTok, how to program your artist page, they're learning. This is all sort of like the analog in social media of having the best startup at music retail for your music catalog or your new release or your new album or your new song. But artists and even labels are having to relearn how to do that in an environment like TikTok.
Yeah. And I can tell you that's true because I have those conversations every week. And it's not only that they're relearning sort of how to break an artist by using a tool like TikTok, and that's one more arrow in their quiver, but it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's not something that you can do the same marketing, same short form video strategy with. You're starting from scratch basically with every single artist based on who they are, what their narrative is, and who their base is. He goes on to ask, have there been artists that you've seen that have really successfully adapted to TikTok and learned it to have any that have really stood out to you?
Yeah, and he said, we talked about Charlie Puth. Even if we hadn't talked about him earlier, he would have been one of the first to come to mind to answer this question. He's very witty, very funny, like some of this stuff where he's just talking in the videos. He says, I always laugh. But also the way that he introduces the songs where he's just very mysterious. And he just, he shows how he's kind of laying down the drums and the keyboards and the vocals. And then he says, It sounds like this. He has figured out how to work TikTok to make it really fun and entertaining to introduce music. And that's, and that right there is about falling in love with an artist, right? And that's when we market artists and you always want them to fall in love with the artist, not the song necessarily.
Exactly.
But the artist.
Yeah. And that's why I love this line of questioning, because he goes on to ask, as a fan, is there one artist you personally want to see blow up on TikTok? I thought that was a brave question.
It was. And then his equally brave response was older Iron Maiden. And it's like, he's a metalhead apparently. So he's talking about Black Sabbath and Ronnie James Dio. So he's a lot of these old kind of metal bands are the ones that he would like to see blow up on TikTok.
Yeah. I thought that was really telling. And that's the bottom line, is that it's not about executives like Ulla Oberman and their favorite artists and pushing those. It's about being open to what the users would react to, not necessarily, what, maybe a slightly older music executive would react to. But I thought this was a really great interview. I'm hoping that we can get Ulla on the program soon to kind of expound on some of these topics, because I think he's very transparent. He's very open and honest. And as we said before, he's like us. He's a music guy.
Music guy.
He's got a passion for music. And if you want to, get a conversation going, ask him about music.
Yeah, for sure. But as I'm reading the article as well, I'm also thinking about the challenges of marketing and working with artists these days. And, the fallback thing is to kind of templatize things. And it's super hard with TikTok because... it's certain things are inexplicable why they hit on TikTok, and it's really hard to break it down and try to repeat those things or those successes with other artists.
Yeah.
And it's so important, and yet it's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, I will tell you two things that I've found that consistently work on TikTok, and they may sound obvious to some people. But it's not necessarily about posting 100 times a day. The two things that I've found across the board that work are authenticity, because people can smell a phony or a copycat a mile away. And the second one is consistency. And that's true with being, having a podcast. It's true with having a newsletter. It's true with anything in your personal and private, professional lives. There's something to be said for consistency, and you don't always have to be the absolute best at what you do if you're authentic. And you and I, before we hit record, we were talking about how we would take hard work over talent 100% of the time, because we all know very talented people who, we always say, I can't want it more than the artist does. They've got to roll up their sleeves. I want them to drive the ship and show that work ethic that inspires the team around them to work harder. And a lot of these, artists that you and I talk about, the reason they're so successful, their songs are great and that, but there's a lot of great songs out there. What separates them is that they don't give up. They're super consistent. They work hard, and they have good relationships and follow through. And I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah. There you go. All right. Well, let's do our last story, Jay. It's from Billboard. It's from our good friend, Glenn Peoples over there. It's Spotify's 138% gain leads Billboard Global Music Index's 31% improvement in 2023. That is kind of a mouthful, isn't it?
It is, but we talk frequently about the Ledger newsletter from Glenn Peoples, and you can subscribe for free over at Billboard. And typically the newsletter sort of gives you a snapshot of what's going on. And if you want to go a little bit deeper, you just go over to Billboard Pro and you can read more. And this week, the more is a full-on article that Glenn wrote called "Will Ad Revenue Improve in 2024?" It says a new survey predicts a rebound, but not for everyone. And this is based on a Media Ocean report that found radio ad spending will be about the same, this year as it was last year. And while dollars should increase for social media, digital, connected TVs, and search, he digs into how those will perform.
So back in November, Media Ocean surveyed nearly 1,100 marketers, ad agencies, media companies, and tech platforms, among other companies, about how they expect to spend on various types of advertising in the coming year. The survey revealed that advertising dollars will continue to flee from legacy media, namely print and television, in favor of social media, digital display, and video and connected TVs.
Yeah, I always forget about connected TVs. Social platforms like TikTok, who we were just talking about, they top the list, of predicted ad spending in 2024. 69% of respondents said that they expect to increase their spend in 2024 on social media, while only about 28% said they'll maintain social media spending at the current rate, and just 3% plan on decreasing social media spending. So social media has taken the biggest jump in the last 2 years or so.
So digital display and video advertising showed a similar breakdown to social media. 65% of respondents expect to increase, 30% plan to maintain, and just 5% expect to decrease their spending. Most respondents also expect to increase their spending for connected TV and search. These categories were little changed from the prior year, and radio and audio advertising will fare about the same as last year.
Yeah, that surprised me a little bit. I thought with some of the things we've been reading about radio that might be in the decline, but that's not the case. And Glenn goes on to write that radio companies that have both digital and broadcast businesses should fare better than those without a digital component, and they may already be seeing a recovery. TV advertising has taken the biggest fall over the last 2 years going into 2022. Only 15% of respondents expected to spend less on local TV, and 13% plan to spend less on national TV. 2 years later, 33% expect to spend less on local TV, and 27% expect to reduce spending on national TV.
So although audio streaming has eaten into the time people spend listening to radio, about 90% of Americans still listen to the radio each week. The same can't be said for video, however, as video streaming has sharply reduced the audience for cable television. In the third quarter, the penetration rate of traditional pay TV, that's cable, telco, and satellite, fell to 54.8% after those companies lost nearly 2 million subscribers, according to Moffett-Nathanson. That marks the lowest penetration rate since way back in 1989.
Wow. Oof. That can be chalked up to the swift rise of video streaming platforms, that we've been talking about. In the third quarter, YouTube TV surpassed satellite company Dish Network to become the fourth largest multi-channel video programming distributor. Moffett-Nathanson, who you just referred to, believes that YouTube TV could surpass satellite company DirecTV for third place in less than a year. And I want to touch on something you just mentioned a second ago, and that is that 90% of Americans still listen to the radio each week. And look, it's not sexy, but you go to where the party is, and people are still listening to the radio, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And every day when I hop in my car, I'm listening to the radio. And so I probably get at least 2 hours between to and fro and during the day of just radio. And I love I love checking in, to be honest, and it provides just another, kind of a point of reference of what's going on in culture and everything. And I'll pop on the local CHR station or whatever they're calling Top 40 radio these days, and just to hear what songs are popular, what's reacting, and that's kind of old behaviors in some cases, but it's also a great way to just kind of get your finger on the pulse of what's going on out there.
Yeah, and it's right there. It's in your car. It's free. You hit the button. You don't have to think about it and put together a playlist or search through everything. You just hit it and go. And the last thing I want to mention really quickly is, we talked about in this piece, this Billboard Global Music Index, and now we have sort of a year snapshot of it in the ledger this week to see the growth. And as you mentioned, that's really driven by Spotify's incredible growth over this last year. And that sadly had to come at the heels of some layoffs and things like that. But the Global Music Index, check it out because it's got things like Hybe, who we refer to every week, Spotify, Ngami, Deezer, SoundCloud, Hypnosis, Tencent, all this stuff. And you can tell just at a snapshot, just glancing at the great, sort of chart that Glenn puts in here, you can kind of get a sense of the health of the overall sort of industry and how it's trending. And it's, I don't miss it every week, or any week. And we talk about it quite frequently. And so I thought it was really great that we could cover it this week.
Absolutely. Definitely worth checking out. And on that note, we got to wrap up the show, Jay. Of course, if you do enjoy the show, we would certainly appreciate if you told one friend. And of course, we couldn't do the show without our good friends over at Bandzoogle, Hypebot, Bands in Town, and the Music Business Association. Big thanks to them.
Yes, sir.
And we certainly appreciate it. So on that note, thanks for listening in this week, folks. Jay and I will be back next week on the Your Morning Coffee Podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.